Welcome to the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
Welcome in, listeners, to the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking everything college hoops. You could have been anywhere else in the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus, and we appreciate that. Special thanks to Spreaker for getting the podcast out into your earbuds, and thank you to Belljar for the intro and outro music. Please look them up on iTunes. Listeners, got a special guest to talk about some of these tickets that got punched over the weekend. We have ESPN's Kevin Connors. You can give Kevin a follow at Kev Connors, ESPN on Twitter. He is the college basketball studio anchor for ESPN and has been keeping you company all season. And he's going to keep us company here on the pod. Thankfully, we get to talk about a couple of those tickets that are punched. We get to talk about Liberty. Kevin thinks, whoa, Liberty 30 wins. That's impressive. We talk about who his player of the year might be. We talk a little bit about who his dangerous teams in the Big East are. Maybe a Gonzaga weakness. We talk about some of the three of the players that really caught his eye for one reason or another. And then we talked shot makers. Are the shot makers that we need to pay attention to in college basketball? Listeners, if you really like what you're listening to here and you enjoy the guests that the Screener College Basketball Podcast has brought you all season, like Kevin, give the podcast a follow. SDS Podcast on Twitter. Efficiency of keystrokes, of course. Please don't forget to give Mike a follow over at Randall Rant. He is the brains and the education behind the Screener College Basketball Podcast. And if you really, really, really like what you're listening to, especially during March, don't be afraid to leave a kind review on your podcast consumption vehicle of choice. Kindness is always cool. Let's get to that conversation with Kevin. I hope that everybody's enjoying March, and we just wanted to say an honest thank you. Thank you for allowing us to keep you company during the finest time of the year. We're honored, we appreciate it, and we treat that company really seriously. So thanks for letting us come along for the ride. Cheers, everybody. All right, listeners, the best time of year has finally hit us. March is on your calendar. And if we have March on the calendar, that means we need to talk college basketball with some experts. And luckily, we have a very familiar expert that all of you have seen, heard, and learned from this season. We have Kevin Connors, who is the studio host of college basketball for ESPN. Kevin, thank you for giving the podcast a couple of minutes here.
Gus, you know it's my pleasure, man. I love the podcast, and I love that you invited me on again.
Well, thank you for giving us a little bit of time. We've been spoiled during this time of the year so far. March has not disappointed, and we've been spoiled all season with you at the desk. It's comforting that you're there taking care of us and informing us. Quick first question. How are things at the desk with Fonz and Coach G? Are you keeping those guys in line?
As much as any human being can. It's so great. I mean, really, we've got such a great crew. Coach Greenberg is a good friend. He's someone who is as knowledgeable and as passionate about the game as anyone. Mafonzo is a great friend. You will not find a nicer human being on the planet. I mean that. I'm not the only one that says that. He is the genuine article. Such a kind man, such a caring individual. Both of those guys are super knowledgeable about the game. I've gotten to work with Sean Farnham and Dallin Cuff quite a bit. I feel the same way about both of those guys. John Crispin in studio quite a bit this season. So it's been a great mix. And like you said, trying to keep those guys in check isn't always easy, but we do our best.
It sounds like you're doing a good job with it. It looks like you're doing a fantastic job with it. And I guess I have a follow-up question with as far as Dallin Cuff. Who would win in a March Madness chess tournament? Dallin Cuff, Chris Spatola, or yourself? Who would you take?
Look, my ethical education is solid, but it's nothing compared to Columbia University and West Point. So I'm going with both of those guys. But if you're asking me to pick one, it's got to be Dallin, right? I mean, the Ivy League education. He's an athlete. He's a good-looking guy. He's the total package. I'm going Dallin.
I think that's a good call. All right, Kevin, you are the people's champion of the mid-majors. One of the Sports Center parts that you have is your mid-major minute. It's a must-watch for all college hoop vagabonds. You highlighted the Delaware Blue Hens and Nate Darling earlier this season, which was pretty cool. Do us a favor. What's one other mid-major that you're paying attention to recently that's caught your eyes and worth a minute in your eyes?
I tell you, the best story in college basketball that has not gotten very, very little, nowhere near enough that it deserves to get, and that's Merrimack College. They're a Division I school in men's basketball for the first time. I think that hockey, they had been Division I for a while, but they sort of transitioned all of their sports to Division I. and they joined the Northeast Conference, and all they did was win the regular season championship in their first year. Now, Gus, here's the thing, and I know you know this, but for your listeners, because they're still transitioning to the Division I level, they can't compete in postseason play. I'm talking about their own conference tournament or the NCAA tournament. So here's a team that won their league, and yet they can't even take part in their own conference tournament to potentially get to March Madness. So it's an unfortunate thing, but it speaks to the incredible job that their coaching staff and that entire team has done in getting them to where they are so quickly in a fun league like the NEC.
Absolutely. And it reminded me a little bit of the Northern Kentucky story with the Norse when they were eligible and then made it that first year. And Merrimack is way ahead of the curve as far as that's concerned. We mentioned that we've been spoiled this past week and this month, and it's been beautifully illustrated. And let's explore one of the places where it's been illustrated, the Big East. The grind ends in a three-way tie. You have Creighton, Nova, and the Hall all sitting atop, sharing that regular season title. The league holds three of the finest players in the nation, Marcus Howard, Powell from Seton Hall, and the very, very bad man that is Kamar Baldwin. Kevin, what Big East teams do you think are best equipped for March success in your eyes?
It's a great question, and it's one that we've kind of been focusing on all year. I'll tell you this, just to illustrate your point about the depth of the Big East even further. St. John's is above 500, and they've won, I believe, 2 of their last 3 conference games. They blew the doors off of Creighton I think it was Creighton anyway, in Carneseca Arena last weekend, and that's a second to last place team in the Big East. So the Big East tournament is going to be just like the Big East tournament used to be. It's going to be outstanding. Now, teams that can make a deep run. I said beginning of the year, Seton Hall was one of my Final Four teams. I said that back in November. I still believe that. They obviously had the injury to Sandro Mamukelashvili during the year, but that guy is a big-time shooter. You need that, obviously, in tournament time. They've got great depth. They've got a front court guy in Romero Gill who is a big body, who's able to, I don't want to say dominate, but certainly be a major presence in the post. And then you touched on Miles Powell, obviously, is as good as any player in the country, certainly at scoring the basketball. So for me, Seton Hall is definitely a team that's capable of making a Final Four run. And I'm still really high on Villanova. Like, I know when I say that to a lot of our analysts, and they're not quite on board with that. It obviously starts with Jay Wright, phenomenal coach. I would encourage anyone who has not seen a lot of Villanova to watch them play. You will see how exceptionally coached they are. They get so many great open looks. Like much of college basketball, if they're making three-pointers, they're tough to beat. They've been defending better. They've got a point guard in Colin Gillespie. I really like Villanova. I think they can make it to the Final Four.
How about this? I think Villanova is a completely different team than they were back in November. They look like a completely different squad. The way that they're running things on offense, they're a little bit more connected on defense, and the efficiency that they're operating on offense. You spoke to the coaching and how much smoother they look. I kind of have a blind spot for Nova usually. But for whatever reason, I really like this team. And great call with Seton Hall back in November. I mean, they have all the pieces. Don't forget about Roden. Sometimes with that Final Four run, you need that player to like explode and bounce and find himself. And Roden just might be that guy for Seton Hall. And Kevin, the Big East is impactful and it has extreme shot makers. Marcus Howard, we just talked about Powell a little bit, Zagorowski. And like Saturday, Baldwin just cans a three and is just an absolute dagger. How much of an advantage is it to have one of these extreme shot makers in a tournament that's a one and done single elimination?
I think it's everything. I mean, how many teams can you go back and say they were led by this guy and this guy happens to be a big shot? You have to have one because it's the bottom line. I mean, this notion of team play, well, obviously that's a huge component, but you've got to have a guy to get the ball to at the end of the game. And the teams you just mentioned all certainly do. And I think any of the realistic teams that can win a national championship have those guys. It's funny, the one team who I'm not so sure they have a consistent guy who can get his own shot might be Gonzaga. And obviously Petrusev has been outstanding all year, but I don't know that he's necessarily a guy who's going to take the ball up the court and get his own shot. Now, they're a great team and a championship contender, and in my opinion, if you're putting money on two teams, it's them and Kansas. But that would be the only real concern that I have about Gonzaga is that, who's the guy? Is it Killian Tilly? Can he stay healthy enough? Again, you've got to have a guy who is a shot maker at this time of year. And certainly the players you mentioned in the Big East, those are all guys who can carry a team for 5-6 games.
No doubt. And speaking of shot makers, let's widen the lens a little bit for the listeners here, Kevin. You've got to see every great player of the season. You've got to break them down and what makes those student athletes really special. Who are one or two student athletes from across the nation, not just Big East, just, who you've seen this season who've wowed you after taking a closer look at the desk and breaking down some tape with some of the experts that you share space with every week? Who are some of the guys you think can do damage this March? One or two?
Gus, I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction. I'm going to give you three guys who I've watched who have wowed me, not only for what they can do as a player, but for what their story is. That sound okay to you?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I'm going number one, Arizona, Zeke Naji. Obviously, he's a fantastic player. If he chooses to go pro, he'll be a first-round pick. But Zeke Naji is an excellent student, and he's also an outstanding piano player. And we had a chance during an Arizona game once earlier this year where we showed a clip of him playing the piano, and he's like concert pianist good. That caught me off guard, stayed with me. I've been a Zeke Naji fan since then. Another one's Udoka Azubuike. Obviously, he's having a phenomenal senior season. He came from Nigeria. His dad died when he was 10. He came to the U.S., assimilated, became a very good college basketball player, and he's exploded as a senior. I mean, you could make a very good case that he could be the National Player of the Year. He lost a ton of weight, got into shape, and he's become a big-time player. So Azubuike's another guy. And then a story that, as a big mid-major fan, I know you know about, and a lot of people got to know him nationally after this past week, and that's the Vermont senior Josh Speidel, who suffered a traumatic brain injury in a car accident when he was in high school. He had been a big-time recruit and committed to Vermont. Coach John Becker kept his promise to play him on senior day. He and Albany coach Will Brown agreed to let him score a basket. This is a young man who was told he'd never read above a third grade level. He's going to graduate with a 3.6 GPA. I would defy you to find a better story in college basketball than that. So those are three guys who've kind of caught my attention with basketball, but also beyond basketball.
That's I think what we're looking for here during March. I think we're looking for, not only we're looking for impact players, but we're looking for those unbelievable storylines. And I think you nailed a couple of them right there. The Vermont story is one that our sport frames perfectly, and you can't replicate that anywhere else in any other sporting venue or avenue. It really encapsulates the student athlete part of the sport, which is really beautiful. And I think you told the Vermont story perfectly. Speaking of mid majors like Vermont, and let's head to the OVC. You know as well as anybody with your mid-major eyes, with admiring the Ohio Valley contest between Murray State and Belmont was unbelievable. Belmont owns one of those shot makers that we were talking about earlier with Adam Kunkel, but it was 6'7" senior Tyler Scanlon. He walked through the back door after a beautiful dribble handoff for a layup with 3 seconds left to punch Belmont's dance ticket. This Belmont team is going to scare some high majors on the other end of the bracket, right, Kevin? This Belmont team is a little dangerous.
I think they're more than a little dangerous, and Gus, if you watched that game, as I know you and I both did, and you watched that final play drawn up by Casey Alexander, it was a thing of beauty. I mean, it was exactly what this time of year is all about. It's getting to see coaches who are outstanding coaches. In the case of Alexander, a guy who's up and coming, and it was perfectly. This is a Belmont team that won 26 games. They're the OVC champions. 12-game win streak to end the year. Kunkel's a guy that shoots at nearly 40% from three-point range. They score nearly 80 points a game. There are a lot of major Division I coaches who are going to get them in a draw, and they're going to say, we want nothing to do with this team. Now, does that mean they're capable of making a run to the Elite Eight? Probably not, but they're going to be a pain in the neck to some big-time program. I can guarantee you that.
I couldn't agree more. They got the big guy Muzinski inside, who averages over 15 points a game, do everything point guard Murphy. They have all the components. They have all the pieces. And it was cool to see Coach Bird in the stands to watch a play that you could see him like drawing up, before he retired last season. I mean, he was part of that Belmont beautiful offense, and it was like a nice homage to Coach Bird in the stands. Let's head out west to the Mountain West. The other ticket that got punched this weekend belongs to Utah State. Shot maker Sam Merrill kept doing his thing. He drilled a three with under 3 seconds to play. That capped a 27-point effort in a 59-56 win over the Aztecs. Kevin, I guess the first question is, should Aztec fans be worried? Is the sky falling for the Aztecs, or is this just what happens in March?
Well, I think it's what happens in March, but I will tell you, I think a little bit of the shine has come off the San Diego State game. Look, it's really hard for 4.5 months to keep it going. And this is a team that has been playing at a really high level all year. Now, they still have Malachi Flynn, who everyone knows about. Yanni Wetzel is a double-double machine. They've got a guy who can defend in KJ Fagan, so I still think that they are a dangerous team.
Right.
They're not going to be a 1 seed anymore, which is fine. They'll be a 2 seed out west, and that's probably even easier for them instead of coming east and being a 1 seed. I'm not convinced about this team. Brian Dutcher's done a really good job. Similar to Gonzaga, they're at a disadvantage where the Mountain West is just not that competitive in terms of teams that are capable of making deep runs into March. I'm not sold on San Diego State as a team that's a Final Four team, but they've been an incredible story, and certainly that's not to take away from what they've done by winning, 30 games this year. I think they're the first team in Division I to 30 games, so 30 wins. So it's been a remarkable ride. I'm just not convinced that they're able to win a national championship.
And I guess the follow-up question there, Kevin, is Utah State punches their ticket, and a bunch of people were, on Utah State early preseason. They were nationally ranked for a little while. Do you think that the Aggies can recapture that form that others predicted early on in the season, and can they frighten another team in the bracket, with the big man Keita and Merrill?
I really think that they can. I'm glad you brought up Neemias Keita, 7-footer. I mean, how many teams have 7-footers who are capable players? And that guy certainly is. It gives them a dangerous component. And then, as we talked about earlier, you need a guy, right? I mean, you need a shot maker in this time of year, and Sam Merrill is that. He's sensational, and they finally delivered in a big spot with that shot. I mean, that is, again, it's March personified, that three-pointer in the closing seconds to beat San Diego State. And they're 9-1 in their last 10 games, Utah State. And so you can say that, well, maybe they haven't been as consistent as we thought they were going to be. Well, 9-1 down the stretch and winning a conference championship and beating a top-5 team, that sounds pretty good to me. And by the way, they're going to have a full week and a half off while everyone else is battling it out in conference tournament play. So Utah State's a team to keep in mind when you're filling out your bracket and you're saying, you know what? I need a 12 seed that's going to win one of these 5-12 or 4-13 games.
I think that they fit the bill there. And if they're that low, that might be a little crazy. But yeah, if they're that low, then they might be vastly underseeded in some weird regard. But I think any 4 or 5 seed would be absolutely scared to death of them. And let's talk about some other tickets punched here, Kevin. We got Winthrop. They take the Big South with a win over Hampton. DJ Burns, the freshman, is just super special. Really impressed with him. The Bradley Braves dance after defeating Valpo 80-66. They can shoot it from 3, and I love Elijah Childs. He's been balling lately. And Liberty secures a dance invite after taking down Lipscomb. They can defend. And Kevin, I guess the question here is just, which one of those 3 do you think might scare or might be live, or, maybe you have caught your eye for one reason or another here out of Winthrop, Bradley, and Liberty?
Well, I'll tell you this. I was sitting next to Bryce Drew as Bradley took down Valpo, and it was an ugly scene on the desk. I mean,
right, I bet so, right?
So Bradley looked good. Winthrop looked good. I had one of those eye-popping games when I watched Liberty take down. Now, let me use another adjective. When Liberty destroyed Lipscomb in the ASUN final, I mean, that was whoa. These guys are no joke. They've won 30 games. They've got a coach in Richie McKay. He's a Tony Bennett disciple. This guy is going to get a Power 5 job. They've got a kid in Caleb Holmesley. He's a lefty. He is, again, one of those players who is a big shot maker for this team. Elijah Cuffey was great for them. Darius McGee's an electrifying player. He's 5'7". He can jump out of the gym. And then the kid, Mayo Baxter Bell, he's a big, wide body. He doesn't look like he's going to do anything, and all he can do is shoot it and take you off the dribble and go coast to coast and post you up. And I mean, I was really blown away by Liberty, and the season that they've had has been outstanding. That gym today was unbelievable. Really, Liberty's a team to me that you can say can win it. I think Liberty is going to win a game in the tournament. I really was that taken by them.
Well, I think if you mentioned the coaching tree that exists there, and if you're going to invest in a team that has a higher seed, why not invest in the team that's going to play the pack line defense? Why not invest in the team that has a legit big in James? Why not invest in the team that has a shot maker, like you mentioned, Holmesley, and some interesting athletes? Like you mentioned Baxter Bell. I always thought of him as like the horizontal type Zion. Like he could do a whole bunch of interesting things, and he's like this bigger athlete. He just doesn't, he's just not going to jump through the gym, but he can do a bunch of different things at like a really odd athletic package. So yeah, I think that if we're going to pay attention to one mid-major here, that might be the one of the pick here. The remaining mid-major slate, we had College Game Day. They took their trip to Dayton this past weekend. Obi Toppin dunked it 7 times and is proving that he just might be the player of the year in the whole entire nation. He made he did his best Dominique Wilkins impression in game, which is bananas. I guess the question is, like, where's your head with this particular Dayton team? Is this is a Dayton team that's going to win a couple of games? Is this a Dayton team that's a little overrated? Is this a Dayton team that can win the Final Four? Or is this a Dayton team that can win the whole thing?
I think it's the latter two that you said. I think it's a Dayton team that is very well equipped to go to the Final Four. I certainly think they're a team that can win a championship. And by the way, I'll go even further than you did. I think Obi Toppin is the player of the year.
Okay.
Devon Donson's been great. Gazabuki's been great as well. Marcus Howard is the country in scoring. Miles Powell's been great. You can go down the list. I think it's Obi Toppin. And here's the thing about Dayton is, as we've been saying all year, they're more than just Obi Toppin, right? I mean, they've got point guard and Jalen Crutcher, who's outstanding. As everyone knows who's listening to this podcast, you got to have a coach. And Anthony Grant, he's a guy who is coaching at a mid-major level, but he is as big time about as you can get in college basketball. I am a huge Anthony Grant believer. I think he's going to stay in Dayton for a long time, unless there's some dream job of his that I don't know about. But this Dayton team is outstanding. They've weathered the storm. They haven't so much as really blinked all season. They stood toe-to-toe with Kansas in Hawaii. Their only other loss was, I believe, in overtime to Colorado. I mean, this team is as good as everyone thinks they are, and I would be stunned if they don't go to the Final Four. I really would. I think that they're that good.
I'm kind of right there with you as far as their balance. I totally agree with your assessment of Grant. I think the couple of years that he spent on the bench, the NBA bench, with Coach Donovan with the Thunder, I think was really beneficial. And I think he brought a couple of those NBA-ish offensive looks to Dayton, and that's really benefited them. They play with that dual point guard situation. Landers has done a bunch of great things for them on the wing. They have a really interesting recipe. And when you have the best player on the floor for every game, that's going to give you a huge advantage. And like you mentioned, Kevin, like they haven't lost in regulation this year. So that has to count for something as well. Right, so speaking of Dayton penciling into the Final Four, so that was going to be like our next question. So how about, is there one other team besides Dayton that has really, you're going to take your pencil and you're just going to automatically fill them into the final bracket, into the Final Four, regardless of what the matchups are? What's one team that you feel uber confident in? They're like, yep, I love the elements that make up this team. I love the coaching characteristics. I love their roster makeup. This team is going to make a Final Four besides the Dayton Flyers, so we've already penciled it.
This is a little bit of a lazy answer, but it's warranted. How about this? I was going to say Baylor, but I'm a little bit concerned. If Maceo Teague is healthy, that's a different story. If he is not healthy, if he's not 100%, that changes the complexion of that team. They don't score it as well when Teague is not 100%. So I'm going to hold off on Baylor, although with the caveat that if he's healthy, I think that they've got a complete team. So my lazy answer is Kansas. I mean, I just think that their season really kind of turned when they made the adjustment of not playing two bigs together. They brought McCormick off the bench. He's not playing with Azubuike all the time, and it's really opened things up for guys like Isaiah Moss and Ochai Agbaji and some of the other shooters, and obviously Devon Dotson is as solid as it gets at the point guard position. So Kansas would be the lazy answer. What have they won? 16, 18 in a row. They're the number one team in the country. They're as good as you think. So I think Kansas would be the answer to that.
I don't think it's a lazy answer. I think this might be the right answer. That's all. I think it's just correct. That's it. Kevin, we'll go a tiny bit off topic here. You mentioned many moons ago that you played against John Wallace from Syracuse in the summer league, who, I went on to NBA greatness and will have his number retired. Kevin, the big question is, did you score on him? Did you get a basket up on him?
Here's the good news. We didn't guard each other, Actually, let me take that back. That's the good news for me. I didn't have to guard him, and he wasn't guarding me. Let's put it like this. There's a reason that I played Division III basketball, and he went on to play in the NBA. He would have gotten the better of me by a long shot. Look, he was a sensational player even back then, and as a big-time Syracuse fan, the career he had, I mean, he's a guy who is in the discussion of the best players, obviously, to ever wear that uniform. Is why his jersey's hanging from the rafters. And that run that he had in the 1996 tournament, the shot, against Georgia, Jason Cipolla actually hit the big shot to send it to overtime, and then Wallace hits the shot to win it in regulation against the Shandon Anderson Georgia Bulldogs team, and then the championship game where they nearly beat a Kentucky team that was way more talented than Syracuse. He holds a special place in my heart as a Syracuse fan, but let's just say he would have embarrassed me on the court when we played back at Big Orange basketball camp.
That's a great story. It's a great recap of Wallace's career, too. That team was special, and you felt like he was carrying the entire load when they got to that championship game when that Syracuse team made that run. All right, let's get you out of here on our 4 T's, 4 quickies. Kevin, tunes. What has been on your playlist this season when you're commuting or getting ready at the desk? Tell the listeners what you've been listening to.
I'm going to give you the most recent one for me, and it's like much of the music I listen to, nothing that was made in the last 30, 40 years. But I finally got around to watching the Eagles documentary, which had been on Netflix, and I think I caught it on Amazon Prime. It is like, if you are even remotely a fan of theirs, which I really wasn't, it was like a mild fan at best. And then I watched that documentary, and I'm like, oh my God, these guys were unbelievable. So I've been into them a little bit more. Soundgarden, obviously, Foo Fighters for me are 2 of my favorites. When the missus is in the car, we have to put on Dave Matthews Band. But if I'm working out, it's Foo Fighters, Chili, Zeppelin, Hendrix, the usual.
I like that that's your usual. That sounds fantastic. All right. Trust, Kevin. We talked about a bunch of shot makers. If you had to pick one, which player in the nation do you trust with a last-second winning possession, not necessarily shot, but last-second possession to win the game?
Miles Powell.
Great answer. Why wouldn't you take the senior, right? Taste. Mm-hmm. Have you had any solid craft beers during the season that you've come across during your travels?
I've had that's kind of become, as you well know, obviously it's a big thing everywhere. It's in Connecticut where I live, it's really become a thing, and so there was one, I don't even know who makes it, but it's called Ice Cream Man. And not because it's sweet, but it's an IPA, and they're impossible to get. Like one of the liquor stores nearby me, they get 4 6-packs, and they're gone before they even hit the refrigerator cooler. So I would say Ice Cream. If you're ever strolling through Connecticut and you come across Ice Cream Man, pick it up. It's good.
All right, fantastic. You heard it there, listeners. If you're traveling through Connecticut, grab that Ice Cream Man. And then travels, Kevin. Do you have any plans to see any games live, or are they just going to anchor you to the desk for the rest of March?
I'm stuck on the desk, whether you want me there, whether you like it or not. As a viewer, I'm stuck. I'm there for championship week. I'm there for the NIT, and that's great. And that's where I love being, because it gives me a chance to get to have an eye on a lot of different games. And didn't get to do any games this year. Last year I did a bunch of Big 12 games, and it just didn't work out this year. But I'll have that written into my next contract and see if anyone there will listen. But so I'll be on the desk for most of the time. No travel plans. Hopefully we'll get out of some baseball games like I did last year for baseball tonight. But for hoops, I'll be on the desk in Brewster, Connecticut.
Perfect. All right, Kevin, thank you so much for keeping us company during championship week and during March. The listeners appreciate it. We appreciate it here. And thank you for giving the podcast a couple of minutes. Appreciate you taking time during the busiest month of the year, especially from the desk that you're sitting at. So thank you so much, Kevin. We appreciate it.
Well, Gus, you know what? When I get to talk hoops with a guy who loves it as much as I do, it's a pleasure. And to all your listeners, I really appreciate everyone listening here into the podcast today and watching us on ESPN all year.
All right, well, we'll stay tuned in, Kevin. Cheers. Thank you.
Cozy in the candlelight.